Gunshots shattered the quiet afternoon in Dust Creek, New Mexico. July 1878 brought a heat that pressed down like an anvil, baking mud brick buildings and parched streets into something closer to hell than civilization. Dust devils swirled across the town's single thoroughfare, marking the path of running footsteps that broke through the momentary silence after gunfire. Abigail Winters appeared around the corner of the Mercantile, skirts gathered in bloodied hands, hair flying loose from what had once been a careful arrangement. She ran like a hunted animal, breath coming in desperate gasps. The front of her cream dress was splattered with crimson, blood that wasn't her own. She managed 6 more steps before a lasso caught her around the waist, yanking her backward with brutal force. Her body hit the dirt street with a dull thud that pushed the air from her lungs in a cloud of dust. "Got her!" a man's voice called in triumph. "Got the murdering bitch!" Men emerged from the saloon and general store, forming a loose circle around Abigail as she struggled against the rope. Women appeared in doorways but kept their distance, clutching children to their skirts. No one moved to help. No one spoke in her defense. "She killed my boy." The voice cut through the gathering crowd, carrying the weight of authority. Mayor Harold Thornton pushed through the onlookers, his face twisted with grief and rage. His hand rested on a Colt Navy 1851 with silver inlaid grips, a weapon carried for show until today. Behind him, 4 men carried an improvised stretcher bearing the bloody body of Edward Thornton, the mayor's only son. Abigail tried to speak but could only cough against the dust filling her throat. When she finally found her voice, it rang clear despite her fear. "He tried to force himself on me. I only defended myself." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone spat on the ground near her head. "Liar!" Mayor Thornton's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "My Edward was to be married next month. He wouldn't soil himself with the likes of you." He turned to address the gathering crowd, voice rising to carry across the street. "This woman has murdered the son of your mayor. Justice must be swift and final." His eyes, red-rimmed with unshed tears, swept the faces before him until he found what he was looking for. "Sheriff Dalton, what say you?" The newly appointed sheriff, a thin man with a drooping mustache, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "The law says she deserves a trial, Mayor." Thornton's laugh was brittle. "A trial? For what everyone saw? Her running with my boy's blood on her hands?" He gestured to the crowd. "You all saw it. And who would pay for a judge to ride circuit out here? Who would feed her while we wait months for justice?" The crowd murmured agreement. "I propose a more practical form of justice," Thornton continued, "one that costs this town nothing." His voice hardened. "Auction her off. Let someone else bear the burden of her crimes." Abigail struggled against the rope, panic rising in her chest. "No, you can't do this. I'm a free woman." But her protests were drowned by shouts of approval. In frontier justice, a life for a life seemed fair enough. And if that life was spent in servitude rather than the grave, all the better. Someone could at least profit from the arrangement. Within the hour, they had built a crude wooden platform in front of the saloon. Abigail stood upon it, wrists and ankles bound with iron chains that had once secured barrels to freight wagons. The metal bit into her skin, but she refused to show pain. Her dress was torn and stained with Edward Thornton's blood, but her posture remained straight, her chin lifted in silent defiance. The auctioneer, a man who normally sold cattle and horses, took a deep swig from a flask before addressing the crowd. "By order of Mayor Thornton, this woman is offered to pay for her crimes. She's educated, can read and write. Strong enough for field work if needed." He ran his eyes over her figure suggestively. "Good for whatever purpose a man might have in mind." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone called out, "Smile for us, sweetheart. Show us what we're buying." Abigail stared back at the sea of faces, men mostly, with eyes made bright by cruelty and whiskey. She stepped forward as far as her chains would allow and spat on the platform at her feet. "None of you can buy my soul," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. For a moment, no one moved. Then a man in a black coat pushed his way onto the stage and backhanded her across the face. The force of the blow snapped her head to the side, and blood welled at the corner of her mouth. The crowd roared its approval. Abigail turned back slowly, green eyes burning even brighter against the red mark forming on her cheek. She smiled then, but it was the smile of a wolf cornered. Dangerous, not submissive. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "Right then. Let's start the bidding. Who will give me $20 for this spirited filly?" "I'll give 15, called a voice from the back. Heads turned. Fletcher Harmon, owner of the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, pushed through the crowd. He wore a vest of expensive leather, a gold watch chain glinting across his substantial belly. His beard was neatly trimmed, his boots polished to a shine that seemed out of place in the dusty street. The auctioneer nodded eagerly. 15 for Mr. Harmon. Do I hear 20? 18, called another man. 20, Harmon countered immediately. The bidding continued, voices calling out numbers that represented not just dollars, but the price of a human life. Abigail stood still, retreating somewhere deep inside herself as men argued over her fate. She had learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged predators. Behind the crowd on the edge of the gathering stood a man unlike the others. Isaiah Morgan watched the proceedings with a stillness that seemed more present than absence. A scar ran down his left cheek from temple to jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. A Remington 1875 revolver hung at his hip, worn from use but meticulously maintained. Beside him, a small boy of about 6 clutched his hand, thin shoulders hunched beneath a shirt too large for his frame. 25, Fletcher Harmon's voice rose above the others. "And that's my final offer for damaged goods." The auctioneer looked around. 25 once, 25 twice. "She looks sad," the boy whispered, tugging at Isaiah's hand. "Like Mama did." Isaiah Morgan's jaw tightened. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, with deliberate slowness that drew every eye, he walked forward through the parting crowd, the boy trailing behind him like a shadow. The murmuring quieted as Isaiah climbed the 3 wooden steps to the platform. The auctioneer frowned. "You got a bid, Morgan." Isaiah reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a single gold coin. He placed it on the edge of the platform where it caught the sunlight, gleaming impossibly bright against the weathered wood. $20 in gold, Isaiah said, his voice low but caring. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. "Hell, Harmon just bid 25 in paper," someone called. Isaiah didn't look away from Abigail's face. "I'm not buying her," he said simply. "I'm paying for her freedom." The crowd fell silent. "My son needs someone to teach him to read," Isaiah continued, "and any man who needs to buy a woman doesn't deserve to have one." Fletcher Harmon's face darkened with anger. "This isn't about deserving, Morgan. It's about justice." "Is it?" Isaiah turned to face the crowd. "This woman was attacked. She defended herself. That's what I see." "My son would never," Mayor Thornton began. "Your son had a reputation," Isaiah cut him off. "We all know it." The silence that followed held a dangerous tension. Even the wind seemed to pause. The auctioneer looked from the mayor to Isaiah, clearly wishing he were elsewhere. Finally, he cleared his throat. "The law says highest bidder, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Harmon has offered 25. Isaiah stared at the man until he looked away. Then he reached slowly into his pocket again and pulled out a second gold coin, placing it beside the first. $40 in gold, he said quietly, double his offer. Fletcher Harmon's mouth twisted, but he made no counter. Gold was worth more than paper currency, and everyone knew it. More importantly, Isaiah Morgan had a reputation of his own. one that made men hesitate to challenge him directly. Mayor Thornton looked as if he might protest further, but something in Isaiah's steady gaze made him reconsider. "Take the money," he finally spat. "She's not worth more." The auctioneer hastily collected the coins. "Sold to Isaiah Morgan for 40 in gold." Isaiah stepped forward and removed his coat, draping it gently around Abigail's shoulders before turning to the auctioneer. "The key to those chains." The man fumbled at his belt and produced a rusted key, which Isaiah took without comment. He unlocked the manacles at Abigail's wrists and ankles, revealing raw red skin beneath. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. Abigail nodded once, her eyes weary but dry. The crowd parted as Isaiah guided her down the steps, one hand hovering near her elbow but not touching her. The boy followed closely, eyes wide and solemn in his thin face. They were halfway across the street when Fletcher Harmon's voice rang out. "You're making a mistake, Morgan. That woman's a murderer. She'll cut your throat in your sleep." Isaiah didn't turn around, but his shoulders stiffened beneath his shirt. Abigail glanced at his profile, noticing how the scar tissue pulled tighter when he clenched his jaw. The boy gripped Isaiah's hand harder, pressing close to his side. "Mr. Morgan," Abigail said quietly as they reached the wagon tied at the hitching post. "Why did you do that?" Isaiah lifted his son onto the wagon seat before answering. "There's been enough death in this town." He offered his hand to help her up, but didn't press when she climbed in without assistance. "And Caleb needs a teacher." The boy, Caleb, watched her with solemn blue eyes that seemed too old for his face. He clutched a ragged stuffed bear missing one button eye, holding it protectively against his chest. Isaiah climbed up and took the reins. With a soft click of his tongue, he urged the horses forward, away from the town and the people who had been ready to sell a human being minutes before. No one tried to stop them. No one called out goodbyes. Abigail sat as far from Isaiah as the wagon seat would allow, his borrowed coat pulled tight around her despite the heat. She kept her eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to look back at the town that had nearly become her prison or her grave. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills when Isaiah finally spoke again. "2 miles ahead is my ranch. It's not much, but there's a roof and clean water." Abigail nodded but said nothing. "You can stay the night," he continued. "In the morning I'll give you a horse and enough money to get wherever you're going. Or you can stay longer if you want. Teach Caleb to read, maybe. It's your choice." Abigail turned to study his profile. The scar was even more pronounced in the slanting sunlight. "Why would you trust me? That man called me a murderer." "Are you?" Her voice was steady. "I killed a man who tried to force himself on me. He tore my dress, told me no one would believe me over the mayor's son." Her mouth twisted bitterly. He was right about that. Isaiah nodded once. "Then you did what you had to do." They crested a small hill, and Abigail saw the ranch spread before them. A modest house with a wide porch, a barn, a corral with 3 horses, and fields stretching toward distant hills. It wasn't grand, but it had been built with care. "Your wife," Abigail said hesitantly, "will she mind a stranger arriving unannounced?" Caleb's small body tensed beside her. Isaiah's hands tightened on the reins. "My wife Sarah was killed 2 years ago," he said after a long pause. "Caleb hasn't spoken a word since." Abigail looked at the child with new understanding. The emptiness in his eyes wasn't simple shyness. It was the hollow gaze of someone who had seen too much, too young. "I'm sorry," she said, the words inadequate against such loss. Isaiah nodded. "The house has 3 bedrooms. You can have the one at the end of the hall. It has a lock on the door." The message was clear. She was not a prisoner here. She could secure her door against him if she wished. The simple acknowledgement of her autonomy after what she had just escaped made something tight in Abigail's chest loosen slightly. As they approached the house, she noticed a small fenced plot beneath an oak tree, a grave marked with a wooden cross. Wildflowers grew in a riot of color around the base. Even from the wagon, Abigail could see it was well tended. Isaiah helped Caleb down from the wagon first, then offered his hand to Abigail. This time she took it briefly, noting the calluses and surprising gentleness of his grip. "Thank you," she said as her feet touched the ground, "for what you did back there." Isaiah met her eyes briefly. No one deserves to be sold. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Abigail with its ease. Mornings were for chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, tending the small vegetable garden that supplied much of their food. Isaiah taught her to milk the cow, his capable hands demonstrating the technique with a gentle patience that made her wonder what he had done before becoming a rancher. Afternoons, while Isaiah worked with the horses or repaired endless items around the property, Abigail sat with Caleb on the porch swing, patiently teaching him to form letters in a lined notebook. The boy remained silent, but his eyes followed her pencil strokes with increasing comprehension. When she praised him for correctly copying a word, his face would brighten in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but suggested the possibility of one someday. In the evenings, they ate together at the kitchen table, the silence gradually giving way to cautious conversation. Isaiah, she discovered, had a dry wit that emerged unexpectedly, usually when she least expected it. He was educated, too. He knew Shakespeare and Emerson, could discuss theology and politics with surprising insight. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked one evening as they washed dishes together, Caleb already asleep in his room. Isaiah's hands stilled briefly in the soapy water. "My father was a judge back east, expected his sons to be well-read, regardless of our inclinations." "Sons? You have brothers?" "Had." The single word carried weight. "James died at Gettysburg. He was the smart one." Abigail sensed a story there but didn't press. "And you? What did you want to be, if not well-read?" A shadow crossed his face. "Doesn't matter now. That was another life." They finished the dishes in silence. As Abigail turned to leave the kitchen, Isaiah spoke again, his voice so low she almost missed it. "I wanted to build things, houses, furniture, things that last." She looked back at him, at the house he had created with his own hands, and thought perhaps he had found his way to that dream after all, though by a path he never would have chosen. On the fourth morning, Abigail rose early to find dew glistening on the grass outside her window. The house was quiet, Isaiah and Caleb still asleep. She slipped outside, drawn to the beauty of dawn breaking over the eastern hills. As she rounded the corner of the house, heading toward the garden, she noticed a basket on the porch steps. It was covered with a checkered cloth, a small bouquet of wildflowers tucked into the handle. Curious, she lifted the cloth to find fresh bread, dried apples, and a small jar of honey. Beneath the bread was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was neat but slightly shaky, as if penned by an older hand. "A woman is not to be sold. She is to be cherished. Clara." Abigail stared at the note, then at the basket. Who was Clara? And how had she known where to find Abigail? The sound of the front door opening made her turn. Isaiah stood there, still in his nightshirt and trousers, hair mussed from sleep. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward the basket. "A gift, I think." Abigail handed him the note. "Do you know who Clara is?" Isaiah's expression softened. "Clara Wilson, widow, lives on the edge of town. She was at the auction, but she didn't participate." He handed the note back. "She lost her daughter some years back. Wrongful accusation. Sees injustice more clearly than most." Abigail looked down at the basket again, touched by the gesture from a woman she couldn't recall seeing. "I should thank her." "We can ride into town later if you want," Isaiah offered, then seemed to realize what he was suggesting. "Or not. No need to go back there if you'd rather not." Abigail considered. The thought of returning to Dust Creek made her stomach tighten, but the alternative, hiding away on the ranch indefinitely, felt too much like letting them win. Besides, she wanted to meet this Clara who had reached out with such unexpected kindness. "I'd like to go," she said finally. "I can't hide forever." Isaiah studied her face, then nodded once. "After breakfast, then. You can borrow Sarah's riding clothes. They might be close to your size." As they ate, Abigail noticed Caleb watching her with particular intensity, as if he sensed something was different about the day. When Isaiah mentioned they were going to town, the boy's eyes widened in alarm. "You'll stay with Mrs. Peterson," Isaiah told his son, referring to their nearest neighbor. "She's making apple fritters today, I hear." Caleb's expression remained troubled. After breakfast, as Abigail changed into the borrowed riding clothes, a divided skirt and simple blouse that fit reasonably well, she heard a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, Caleb stood there clutching his bear. "Hello, Caleb," she said gently. "Is everything all right?" He stared up at her, eyes wide and worried. Then with deliberate care, he held out the stuffed bear. Abigail knelt to his level. "Are you lending him to me for the trip?" Caleb nodded solemnly. "That's very kind. What's his name?" Caleb didn't answer, of course, but he touched the bear's remaining button eye with one finger. "Button?" Abigail guessed. "That's a good name." The boy's expression didn't change, but he seemed satisfied that she understood. He turned and padded back down the hallway, shoulders a little less tense than before. When Abigail emerged onto the porch with the stuffed bear tucked into the saddlebag, Isaiah raised an eyebrow but made no comment. He helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy, then swung up onto his own horse, a tall black gelding that danced sideways with barely contained energy. The ride to town took less than an hour. As they crested the final hill and Dust Creek came into view, Abigail felt her heart rate increase. Isaiah must have noticed her tension because he slowed his horse to ride beside her. "We don't have to do this today," he said quietly. Abigail straightened her spine. "Yes, we do." Clara Wilson's small house sat on the outskirts of town, its wooden siding weathered to silver gray, a neat garden of vegetables and flowers surrounding it like a moat. As they dismounted, the front door opened, and an elderly woman appeared on the porch. Clara was tiny, barely reaching Abigail's shoulder, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were clear and direct. She wore a simple gray dress with an immaculate white apron. "About time you brought her to see me, Isaiah Morgan," she said without preamble. "I was beginning to think you were keeping her prisoner out there." Isaiah's mouth twitched. "Good morning to you too, Mrs. Wilson." Clara turned her attention to Abigail, eyes sweeping her from head to toe in frank assessment. "You look better than the last time I saw you, girl. Come inside. The tea's already on." The interior of the house was as neat as its garden, every surface polished to a shine. Photographs lined the walls. A younger Clara with a stern-faced man who must have been her husband, and a beautiful young woman with Clara's direct gaze and determined chin. "My Rebecca," Clara said, noticing Abigail's attention to the photograph. "She'd be about your age now, if she'd lived." "I'm sorry for your loss," Abigail said softly. Clara nodded once, as if accepting the condolence as her due. "Isaiah tells me you've agreed to teach Caleb to read." "I'm trying. He's very bright." "Of course he is. Takes after his mother that way." Clara poured tea into delicate china cups that looked out of place in the frontier town. Sarah Morgan was the smartest woman in 3 counties. Would have recognized Edward Thornton for the snake he was, too. Isaiah, who had been standing by the window watching the street, turned at this. "Clara," he warned. The old woman waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, hush. The girl deserves to know what kind of nest of vipers she's landed in." She fixed Abigail with a penetrating stare. "That boy you killed had forced himself on at least 3 other girls that I know of. His father paid them off or threatened them into silence. You're just the first one who fought back hard enough to end it. Abigail's hands tightened around her teacup. If that's true, why didn't anyone speak up at the auction? Fear, Isaiah said from the window. Thornton owns half the businesses in town, holds the mortgages on most of the rest. People who cross him tend to lose everything. Clara nodded grimly, and Fletcher Harmon owns the other half. Between them, they've got this town in a stranglehold. She leaned forward. You need to be careful, girl. Fletcher doesn't like losing, especially not to Isaiah Morgan. He's wanted that ranch of yours for years, she added, glancing at Isaiah. Let him want, Isaiah said, his voice hard. He's not getting it. It's not just the ranch he wants now. Clara's gaze returned to Abigail. He had plans for you, girl. Plans that didn't include teaching a child to read. A chill ran through Abigail despite the warm day. She'd seen the way Fletcher had looked at her on the auction block, like a man selecting a horse, not just for breeding, but for breaking. I'm not afraid of Fletcher Harmon, she said with more confidence than she felt. Clara's weathered face creased in a smile. I believe you're not, which is why I'm going to tell you something else. She glanced at Isaiah. Something he should have told you already. Isaiah frowned. Clara, don't. She deserves to know who she's living with, Isaiah Morgan, especially if Fletcher decides to make trouble. Clara turned back to Abigail. Isaiah wasn't always a rancher. Before he settled here with Sarah, he had another name, another life. Abigail looked between them, confusion giving way to curiosity. What do you mean? Isaiah's jaw tightened, the scar tissue along his cheek turning white with tension. It doesn't matter now. It matters if Fletcher decides to use it against you, Clara countered. It matters if he brings men to your door who know your real name. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Isaiah sighed and turned from the window to face Abigail directly. Before I was Isaiah Morgan, I was Solomon Reed. He paused, watching her face for a reaction. It might not mean anything to you, but around here, that name carries weight. Abigail frowned, trying to place why the name sounded vaguely familiar. Then understanding dawned. The gunslinger, the one they called the judge because he delivered his own form of justice. Isaiah's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of the man he had once been. Those stories are exaggerated. Not by much, Clara murmured into her teacup. Abigail stared at the quiet rancher who had saved her from the auction block, trying to reconcile him with the notorious figure from dime store novels and campfire tales. Solomon Reed had been a legend throughout the territories. A gunman so fast and accurate, he seemed almost supernatural to those who witnessed his draw. Some said he had killed 30 men. Others put the number over 50. All agreed that once he marked someone for death, escape was impossible. What happened? Abigail asked finally. To Solomon Reed, I mean. He died, Isaiah said flatly, in a shootout in Colorado. At least that's what the newspapers reported. He met Sarah, Clara corrected gently. She showed him there was more to life than revenge and retribution. They came here to start over, bought that ranch, changed their names, lived quietly for 5 years before she was killed. Abigail tried to absorb this new information. The man who had opened his home to her, who read poetry by his wife's grave in the moonlight, had once been one of the most feared men in the West. Yet instead of making her afraid, the knowledge somehow made her feel safer. If Fletcher Harmon or the mayor came looking for trouble, they would find more than they bargained for. Does Caleb know? She asked. Isaiah shook his head. He was born Isaiah Morgan's son. That's all he needs to know. For now, Clara added, but secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially in small towns. As if to punctuate her words, a commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, the clatter of horses' hooves on the packed dirt of the street. Isaiah moved swiftly to the window. Damn, he muttered. Fletcher's men, 6 of them, heading this way. Clara rose with surprising agility for a woman her age. Out the back door, both of you. There's a path through the gardens that leads to the church. Your horses are too visible here. Isaiah hesitated. I don't run from men like Fletcher Harmon. This isn't about your pride, you fool, Clara snapped. It's about keeping her safe. She jerked her chin toward Abigail. You think they just happened to find you here? Someone's been watching, waiting for her to show her face in town again. Isaiah's expression hardened, but he nodded. Thank you for the warning, Clara. Go, the old woman said, making shooing motions with her hands. I'll delay them if they come to the door. Tell them you were never here. As they slipped out the back door, Abigail heard Clara muttering, Stubborn man, just like his father was. They followed a narrow path between garden plots, keeping low to avoid being seen from the street. The small white church came into view around a bend, its steeple rising against the blue sky, like a finger pointing to heaven. We'll circle around behind it, Isaiah said in a low voice. There's a stable there where we can borrow horses. I know the minister. Abigail nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They were nearly to the church when a voice called from behind them. Well, look what we have here. The murderer and her protector. They turned to find two men blocking the path, both wearing the same silver belt buckle embossed with the letter H that marked them as Fletcher Harmon's men. One held a rifle pointed casually in their direction. Isaiah pushed Abigail slightly behind him, his body coiled with an alertness she hadn't seen before. Move aside, he said, his voice carrying a new edge that raised the hairs on the back of Abigail's neck. We have no quarrel with you. Maybe not, the man with the rifle said, but Mr. Harmon has a quarrel with you. Says you stole something that belongs to him. I belong to no one, Abigail said, stepping out from behind Isaiah. And I won't be treated like property. The second man sneered. Hear that, Pete? The little killer has opinions. Isaiah's hand moved to his hip, and for the first time, Abigail noticed the gun belt partially concealed beneath his long coat. She had never seen him wear it before. You don't want this fight, Isaiah said quietly. Trust me on that. Something in his tone made both men hesitate. The one called Pete lowered his rifle slightly. Mr. Harmon just wants to talk to the woman. No one needs to get hurt. If he wants to talk, he can come to my ranch, unarmed and alone. Isaiah's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. Now move aside. The standoff might have ended there, if not for the arrival of more riders from the direction of town. Fletcher Harmon himself led them, his substantial frame filling the saddle of a large bay horse. Behind him rode 4 more men, all armed. Morgan, Fletcher called as he dismounted. I see you found my property. She's not property, Isaiah replied, his hand still resting near his gun. And she's under my protection. Fletcher's smile didn't reach his eyes. Protection? That's a generous way to put it. The way I hear it, you're harboring a fugitive, a murderess who killed the mayor's only son. You know as well as I do what Edward Thornton was, Isaiah said. What he did to girls like her. Fletcher spread his hands in a gesture of false innocence. I know the law says killing a man is murder, no matter what excuses you dress it up in. He fixed his gaze on Abigail. The mayor's offering a reward now. $500 for the woman who killed his son. Dead or alive. Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. A formal bounty meant hunters throughout the territory would be looking for her. Nowhere would be safe. That's not legal, Isaiah said, though he didn't sound surprised. There's been no trial, no conviction. Legality is a flexible concept out here, Fletcher replied. You of all people should know that, Solomon. The use of his former name hung in the air like gun smoke. Isaiah's expression didn't change, but Abigail felt him tense beside her. That man is dead, Isaiah said softly. Fletcher laughed. Is he? Let's find out. His hand dropped to his gun. What happened next occurred so quickly, Abigail's mind could barely process it. One moment, Isaiah stood beside her, still and controlled. The next, his gun was in his hand. The report so fast it sounded like a single shot, though she was certain there had been two. Fletcher staggered backward, his unfired pistol dropping from suddenly limp fingers. Blood blossomed across his shoulder like a gruesome flower. One of his men clutched his arm, a similar stain spreading across his sleeve. "The next ones won't be warnings," Isaiah said, his voice carrying the same deadly calm as before. "Take your boss and go." The uninjured men stared in shock, recognition dawning on their faces as they realized who they were truly facing. They rushed to help Fletcher back onto his horse, none of them willing to test whether the rumors about Solomon Reed's legendary speed were exaggerated. As they retreated, Fletcher called over his shoulder, "This isn't over, Morgan. That woman will hang for what she did." Isaiah didn't lower his gun until the riders disappeared around the curve of the road. When he finally holstered it, his hand was rock steady, but his eyes, when he turned to Abigail, held a weariness that seemed to age him a decade. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. Abigail stared at him. This man of contradictions, who had just demonstrated why Solomon Reed's name still carried such weight years after his reported death. Yet all she felt was gratitude, not fear. "You saved my life, again." She reached out impulsively and touched his arm. "Thank you." Isaiah looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back at her face. Something shifted in his eyes, a softening, a recognition of the connection forming between them, despite all the reasons it shouldn't. "We need to go," he said, gently pulling away. "It's not safe for you here anymore." The journey back to Morgan Ranch was swift and tense. Isaiah took hidden trails to avoid any potential ambush, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. His vigilance reminded Abigail that this was no ordinary rancher, but a man who had survived countless attempts on his life. "You're quiet," Isaiah observed as they emerged from a narrow ravine into open country. His ranch was visible in the distance, a smudge of green against the golden landscape. "I'm thinking," Abigail replied, "about what you saw back there." She met his gaze directly. "Yes." Isaiah studied her face for a moment, then looked away. "I hadn't drawn that gun in over 7 years. Not since Sarah." He trailed off, then continued in a different direction. "I promised her I was done with that life. You did it to protect me." Abigail said softly, "I think she would understand." His mouth twisted in something not quite a smile. "Maybe, but understanding and accepting aren't the same thing." They rode in silence for another minute before Abigail spoke again. "Were the stories true?" "About Solomon Reed?" Isaiah's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "Some, not all." "Which ones?" He sighed. "I was fast with a gun. Faster than most. And yes, I killed men. But I wasn't some avenging angel dealing out justice like the dime novels claimed." His voice hardened. "I was angry. My brother was murdered by a man who walked free on a technicality. I hunted him down. After that, it became a reputation I couldn't escape." Abigail tried to reconcile this confession with the quiet rancher who read poetry by moonlight. "How did you meet Sarah?" For the first time since they'd left town, a genuine smile touched Isaiah's lips. "She shot me." "What?" "Caught me trespassing on her father's property. Winged me with a rifle from 50 yards. His smile widened at the memory. "When she realized I wasn't a cattle thief, just lost, she patched me up herself. Gave me the worst scolding of my life while she did it." Abigail laughed, surprised by the image. "She sounds remarkable." She was. The smile faded. "She saw something in me worth saving. No one had ever looked past the name before." They crested the final hill before the ranch. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields, turning everything golden. In the yard, Mrs. Peterson, a stout woman with iron gray hair, sat on the porch with Caleb, who appeared to be sorting a pile of colorful stones. "I should warn you," Isaiah said as they approached. "Word will spread about what happened in town today. Fletcher's not the type to keep quiet about being humiliated, even if he changes the details to save face. And there's the bounty to consider." "What does that mean for us?" Abigail asked, the brief lightness of their conversation evaporating. "It means you're not safe here anymore." Isaiah's expression was grim. "It would be better if you moved on. I can give you money, supplies, a good horse, get you to Denver or further." Abigail felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The prospect of leaving, of being alone again, hunted again, filled her with a dread that surprised her with its intensity. In just a few days, this ranch had begun to feel like somewhere she belonged. More importantly, Caleb had begun to respond to her. The thought of abandoning the silent child who had entrusted her with his precious bear felt like betrayal. "And if I don't want to leave?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Isaiah looked at her, surprise evident in his eyes. "You'd be putting yourself at risk." "For what?" "For Caleb," she said. "For the promise I made to teach him." She stopped herself before adding, "For you." A complicated series of emotions crossed Isaiah's face. Before he could respond, Caleb spotted them and came running, his solemn face transformed by an almost smile. Mrs. Peterson followed more slowly, her expression concerned. "Thank the Lord you're back," she said as they dismounted. "There's been talk in town. Riders came through asking questions about a Boston woman." Isaiah's hand instinctively went to his gun. What kind of questions? Where she might be hiding, whether anyone had seen her. Mrs. Peterson's eyes darted to Abigail. "I didn't say anything, of course, but they're offering money for information now." "The mayor's bounty," Isaiah muttered. "News travels fast." "It's not just the mayor," Mrs. Peterson said, lowering her voice, though there was no one else to hear. "There's a man from back east, fancy suit, city manners. He's the one putting up most of the reward." Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. "What did he look like? This man from the east?" Mrs. Peterson frowned in concentration. "Tall, well-dressed, dark hair, very neat. Had a scar above his right eye, shaped like a crescent." "Victor," Abigail whispered, the name escaping like air from a punctured lung. Her knees threatened to buckle beneath her. Isaiah was at her side instantly, one hand steady under her elbow. "You know him." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway, unable to find her voice immediately. Caleb pressed against her skirts, his small face tilted up in concern. She forced herself to breathe, to focus on the child's worried eyes rather than the terror clawing at her throat. "Let's get inside," Isaiah said, guiding her toward the house. "Mrs. Peterson, thank you for watching Caleb. It might be best if you head home before dark." The older woman nodded, clearly burning with curiosity but too well-mannered to press. "You take care, Isaiah Morgan. And you too, Miss Winters. Whatever trouble you're in, I hope it passes you by." Once inside, Isaiah settled Abigail at the kitchen table and poured her a glass of whiskey. "Drink," he ordered. "Then tell me who Victor is and why the mere mention of him nearly put you on the floor." Abigail took a small sip, grimacing as the liquor burned a trail down her throat. The heat helped, grounding her in the present moment. This kitchen, these people, the reality of safety, however temporary. "Victor Montgomery," she said finally. Is, my fiancé, or was supposed to be. He's the reason I left Boston, the reason my father is dead." Isaiah sat across from her, his scarred face unreadable. "I'm listening." Caleb, sensing the gravity of the moment, climbed onto the bench beside Abigail. To her surprise, he leaned against her side, a small, warm weight offering silent comfort. She placed her hand gently on his back, drawing strength from his trust. "My father was a minister in Boston," Abigail began. Not a wealthy congregation, but respectable. Victor's family owned half the shipping businesses in the harbor. Our worlds shouldn't have intersected, but Victor started attending our church. He courted me with poetry and promises. Her mouth twisted. I was naive enough to believe him. Isaiah remained silent, waiting. We were engaged to be married. My father was suspicious from the beginning, said Victor's interest in a minister's daughter seemed convenient rather than genuine. But I was in love, or thought I was. Abigail stared into her glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. Then my father discovered something. Irregularities in the church accounts that Victor had been helping to manage. Missing funds, but it was worse than simple theft. She took a deep breath, steeling herself to speak aloud what she had barely been able to admit even to herself. Victor was using the church as a front for something terrible. Young women from poor families would be offered positions as maids or companions in wealthy homes. They'd disappear, shipped to God knows where. Her voice broke. My father found letters, records, proof that Victor was trafficking women under the guise of charitable placement. Isaiah's face darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. When my father confronted him, Victor laughed, said no one would believe a minister over one of Boston's most respected businessmen. But my father was determined to go to the authorities. Abigail's hand shook as she raised the glass again. The next day, he was found dead in his study. They said he'd taken his own life, left a note confessing to embezzling church funds. But I knew he wouldn't. He was murdered, Isaiah finished for her. Abigail nodded. Victor came to me afterward, all sympathy and concern, but his eyes were wrong, cold. When I told him I knew what he'd done, he didn't even deny it, just said I should be careful about making accusations without proof. She shuddered at the memory. He said we would still be married, that it would be best for everyone. That night, I packed what I could carry and fled. And he's been hunting you ever since. Not just for what I know, Abigail said quietly. Victor doesn't like losing what he considers his property. The irony of escaping one man who saw her as property, only to be auctioned as another's, was not lost on her. Isaiah's expression had grown increasingly grim as she spoke. When he finally responded, his voice carried the chill she had heard in town, the voice of Solomon Reed rather than Isaiah Morgan. If Victor Montgomery has followed you here, it's not just to silence you. He's eliminating loose ends. He met her eyes directly. How much did you actually see? What kind of evidence could you provide against him? Abigail hesitated. I saw the letters, names, dates, destinations, and I overheard a conversation between Victor and another man about shipments to New Orleans, San Francisco, even territories further west. They specifically mentioned New Mexico. Isaiah's eyes narrowed. You think his operation extends here? I don't know, but Victor wouldn't have come personally just to find me. I'm not that important. She straightened her spine, decision crystallizing. I should leave tonight. If he's here, you and Caleb could be in danger just by association. No. Isaiah's response was immediate and firm. Running won't solve this. If what you're saying is true, Victor Montgomery is not just a murderer, but part of something much larger, something that needs to be stopped. And how exactly do we do that? Abigail asked, an edge of desperation in her voice. It's my word against his. I have no proof, no witnesses, just the knowledge that my father died because he discovered the truth. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant, as if seeing something beyond the kitchen walls. When I was hunting the man who killed my brother, I made connections with federal marshals, men who worked outside local jurisdictions, answerable only to Washington. If Montgomery's operation crosses state lines, that makes it a federal matter. Hope flickered briefly in Abigail's chest, only to be extinguished by cold reality. Even if you could contact these people, it would take weeks for them to respond. Victor is here now, and he won't stop until he finds me. Then we make sure he doesn't find you, Isaiah said, rising from the table with sudden purpose. At least not until we're ready for him to. Caleb tugged at Abigail's sleeve, his solemn eyes asking a question she couldn't quite interpret. She smoothed his hair gently. It's all right, Caleb. Your father has a plan. The boy's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he remained pressed against her side, a silent guardian. Isaiah moved to a cabinet in the corner, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. Inside was a rifle, several revolvers, and boxes of ammunition. He began checking each weapon methodically. First, we secure the house, he said, not looking up from his task. Then I send word to Clara. She has connections in Santa Fe, people who might be able to help. He glanced at Abigail. And then we wait. For what? She asked. For Victor Montgomery to make a mistake. Isaiah's smile was cold. Men like him always do. 4 days passed in a state of watchful tension. Isaiah fortified the ranch as best he could, positioning lookouts on the surrounding hills, trusted neighbors who owed him favors, and bore their own grudges against Fletcher Harmon. Abigail kept Caleb close, continuing his lessons, but now within the safety of the house, rather than on the exposed porch. On the morning of the 5th day, Clara Wilson arrived unexpectedly, her ancient wagon raising dust on the horizon, long before she reached the ranch. Isaiah met her in the yard, rifle in hand, until he recognized the visitor. You've got trouble coming, Clara announced without preamble as she climbed down from the wagon seat with surprising agility for her age. That Eastern fellow, Montgomery, he's been asking all over about a Boston girl with green eyes, offering serious money for information. Has anyone talked? Isaiah asked, helping her with her bags. Clara snorted. Not to him directly, but people talk to me, and I hear things. She fixed her sharp gaze on Isaiah. Fletcher's joined forces with him. They've got at least 15 men. Word is they're planning to raid the ranch tomorrow at dawn. 15 men, Isaiah repeated, his expression unreadable. Those are poor odds, even for Solomon Reed. That's why I'm here, Clara said, producing a small derringer from her pocket with a flourish. Make it 14. Despite the gravity of the situation, Isaiah's mouth twitched. I appreciate the sentiment, Clara, but I'm not putting you in danger. I put myself in danger, thank you very much, she retorted, marching past him toward the house. Besides, I've been shooting men who needed it since before you were born. Inside, Abigail looked up from where she sat with Caleb at the kitchen table, teaching him to form letters in a lined notebook. Her face paled at Clara's news. 15 men, she whispered. Isaiah, you can't fight that many, not even you. We won't be fighting them, he said, his voice calm despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Not directly. I sent word to Marshal Williams 3 days ago. He should be on his way from Santa Fe with federal deputies. Should be, Abigail pressed, but you don't know for certain. Isaiah met her gaze steadily. No. The telegraph line to Santa Fe is down. Storm took out the poles south of here last week. Abigail closed her eyes briefly. So we might be on our own. We might, he acknowledged, but I've been on my own against worse odds. Not with a child to protect, she pointed out. At the mention of his son, Isaiah's expression softened. He looked at Caleb, who was watching the adults with those 2 old eyes that missed nothing. I know a place, Clara interjected. Underground room beneath the church in town. Minister built it during the Apache raids years back. It's forgotten now, but I know the way in. Boy would be safe there. Isaiah shook his head. Town's not safe. Fletcher practically owns it. Which is why he'd never think to look there, Clara countered. Hide in plain sight. That's always been my motto. As the adults debated, Caleb slid from his chair and moved to the window, peering out at the approaching dusk. He returned to the table and carefully wrote something in his notebook, then pushed it toward Abigail. She glanced down and froze. In painstaking, childish script, he had written a single word. "Stay." "Caleb," she whispered, "did you write this?" The boy nodded solemnly. Then, to her astonishment, he opened his mouth and spoke aloud, for the first time in her presence, his voice rusty from disuse but clear. "Stay," he said. "Don't go." The silence that followed was absolute. Isaiah stared at his son as if seeing a ghost, his face a study in disbelief and dawning hope. "Caleb," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you're talking." The boy looked at his father, then back to Abigail. "Don't want to hide." "Want to stay with you." He reached out and took Abigail's hand. "Both of you." Isaiah crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt beside his son's chair. "You don't have to hide, son, but you do need to be safe." His voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes being brave means letting other people protect you while you grow strong." Caleb considered this, his small face serious. "Like Mama did?" Isaiah's breath caught. "Yes," he managed after a moment. "Like your mama did." Abigail watched them, father and son, united by loss but finding their way back to each other. A fierce protectiveness welled up inside her, not just for Caleb, but for Isaiah too. This man who had saved her in more ways than one. She would not be the reason they lost each other again. "Clara's right," she said suddenly. "Caleb should go to the church with her. And I should go too, but not to hide." She turned to Isaiah. "I'll be the bait." Isaiah's head snapped up. "Absolutely not." "Victor wants me," Abigail continued, the plan forming as she spoke. "Let him think he's found me. While he's focused on me, you can deal with Fletcher and his men." "It's too dangerous," Isaiah insisted. "So is doing nothing," she countered. "If Victor's operation is as extensive as I think it is, he won't stop with me. How many more girls will disappear if we don't end this now?" Isaiah stood slowly, studying her face. "You're willing to risk your life to stop him?" "My father was willing to risk his," she said simply. "I'm my father's daughter." Dawn broke cold and clear, the eastern sky painted in streaks of pink and gold that belied the tension hanging over Morgan Ranch. Isaiah stood on the porch, his Remington at his hip, a Winchester rifle propped against the railing within easy reach. He wore his gun belt openly now, no longer hiding the man he had once been. Caleb and Clara had left during the night, taking a circuitous route to town that avoided the main roads. The boy had gone bravely, clutching his bear in one hand and a small bag of provisions in the other. His final words to his father had been clear and strong. "Come back," Isaiah had promised, sealing the vow with a kiss to his son's forehead. Now he waited with Abigail, both scanning the horizon for the first sign of riders. They didn't have to wait long. Just as the sun cleared the eastern hills, a dust cloud appeared in the distance, growing larger as it approached. "At least 10 riders," Isaiah observed, his voice calm. "Maybe more behind them." Abigail nodded, her mouth dry with fear but her resolve unwavering. "Victor will be with them. He likes to watch, not participate." "Remember the plan," Isaiah said, turning to her. "Stay inside until I give the signal, then make your way to the barn. The trap door in the floor leads to a root cellar with a tunnel that comes out beyond the corral. Marshal Williams should be waiting there, if my message got through." "And if it didn't?" Abigail asked. Isaiah's eyes, the color of winter sky, met hers. "Then I'll find you, whatever happens." He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek gently. "Abigail, She covered his hand with her own. "I know," she said softly. "Me too." A rifle shot cracked the morning stillness, the bullet splintering wood inches from Isaiah's head. He pushed Abigail down and to the side in one fluid motion, drawing his revolver as he did so. "Get inside," he ordered, returning fire with deadly precision. One of the approaching riders tumbled from his saddle. Abigail scrambled into the house, closing the door behind her, but positioning herself at a window where she could see the yard. The riders had spread out, surrounding the ranch house. In their center, mounted on a magnificent black stallion and dressed in an immaculate suit despite the dust of travel, sat Victor Montgomery. Even at this distance, Abigail could see his cold smile, the same expression he had worn when telling her that her father's death was regrettable but necessary. Beside him, his arm in a sling from Isaiah's previous shooting, rode Fletcher Harmon. "Morgan!" Fletcher's voice carried across the yard. "We know you're harboring a fugitive. Send out the woman, and you might live to see sunset." Isaiah's response was a single shot that knocked Fletcher's hat from his head without drawing blood. The message was clear. Next time, he wouldn't miss. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, neither side willing to make the first decisive move. Then Victor nudged his horse forward, stopping just beyond effective pistol range. "Miss Winters," he called, his cultured voice carrying easily in the morning air. "I know you can hear me. This needn't end in bloodshed. Your accusations against me are serious, but ultimately unprovable. I'm willing to forget this unfortunate episode and take you home to Boston, where you belong." Abigail's hands clenched into fists. The audacity of the man, to speak as if she were a wayward child rather than a witness to his crimes. She moved to the door, ready to confront him, but Isaiah's warning glance stopped her. "Not yet. Wait for the signal." "She's not going anywhere with you, Montgomery," Isaiah called back. "I know what you are, what you've done." Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "And what exactly do you think you know, Mr. Morgan? Or should I address you as Mr. Reed? Solomon Reed, the infamous gunslinger who found religion and disappeared. Until now." "I know you're trafficking women across state lines," Isaiah replied, his voice steady. "I know you murdered Abigail's father when he discovered your operation. I know you've got connections in every major city from Boston to San Francisco. And I know the federal marshals are very interested in all of it." For the first time, Victor's composure slipped. His head turned sharply, scanning the surrounding hills as if expecting to see marshals materializing from the landscape. "A bluff," he said, but with less certainty than before. "No federal marshal would come all this way on the word of a killer and a whore." Isaiah's laugh was cold. "They would if that killer used to ride with them. Before I was Solomon Reed, I was Deputy Marshal Isaiah Morgan. Some of those men out there wearing badges used to call me friend." It was a lie, Abigail knew, a calculated risk to sow doubt and confusion. But Victor couldn't know that. Neither could Fletcher, whose face had paled at the implications. "You're lying," Fletcher said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Isaiah countered. "Ask yourself why a man with my reputation would be living quietly on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, unless he had protection from the right people." As he spoke, he moved subtly, positioning himself between the riders and the barn, opening a path for Abigail to follow when the time came. That time arrived with unexpected suddenness. From the hills behind the ranch came the sound of rifle fire, not aimed at the house, but at the ground near the feet of Victor's men. The horses reared and plunged in panic. Isaiah gave the signal, 3 rapid shots into the air. Abigail didn't hesitate. She threw open the door and ran, not toward the hills as Victor might expect, but toward the barn, keeping low and using the corral fence as cover. "There she is!" someone shouted. "Get her!" Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Isaiah returned fire methodically, each shot finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. 3 men fell before the rest could take cover. Abigail reached the barn, yanking open the heavy door just enough to slip inside. The dim interior smelled of hay and horses. She located the trap door beneath a pile of feed sacks, exactly where Isaiah had described it. Pulling it open, she found a rough-hewn ladder leading down into darkness. She had just started her descent when the barn door crashed open. Framed in the sunlight stood Victor Montgomery, a small Derringer pistol in his manicured hand. "Hello, Abigail," he said, as if they were meeting at a Boston social function. "You've led me on quite a chase." "Victor," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "You should have stayed in Boston." He smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "And let my investment walk away." "You underestimate your value, my dear. Not just as my future wife, but as a loose end that needs tying up." "Is that what my father was? A loose end?" Victor sighed, as if disappointed by her persistence on an unpleasant topic. "Your father made a choice, as did you. Now I'm making mine." He raised the Derringer. "Goodbye, Abigail." The shot that rang out wasn't from Victor's gun. From the doorway behind him, a woman's voice called out, "That's for my daughter, you son of a bitch." Victor staggered forward, a look of confusion crossing his face as he dropped to his knees. Behind him stood Clara Wilson, her small Derringer still smoking. "Clara!" Abigail gasped. "Couldn't let you have all the excitement," the old woman said, stepping over Victor's prone form. "Besides, I promised Isaiah I'd make sure you got away." "You shot him," Abigail said, still processing what had happened. "Not fatally," Clara clarified, nudging Victor with her toe. "More's the pity, but he'll live long enough to hang." She looked up at Abigail. "Now come on. Your ride to Santa Fe is waiting, and we haven't got all day." Outside, the gunfire had subsided. As they emerged from the barn, Abigail saw Isaiah standing amid a group of men wearing federal marshal badges. The tallest among them, a gray-haired man with a weathered face and steady eyes, could only be Marshal Williams, the man Isaiah had sent for. Fletcher Harmon and his remaining men were being disarmed and restrained. "Took your sweet time getting here," Isaiah called to Williams, though relief underlay the accusation. The marshal shrugged. "Had to be sure I wasn't riding into a trap. Solomon Reed asking for my help? That's not something I hear every day." Despite his gruff tone, there was respect in the way he looked at Isaiah. "Your message said this was bigger than a local dispute. Something about trafficking women across state lines?" "That's right," Isaiah confirmed, nodding toward the barn. "The man responsible is in there. Shot, but alive." "Good," William said. "I've got questions for him." 2 weeks later, Abigail stood on the porch of the Morgan Ranch, watching as the sun set behind the western hills. Her testimony in Santa Fe had helped federal authorities begin dismantling Victor Montgomery's trafficking network, which had indeed stretched from Boston to San Francisco. The evidence, combined with testimony from other victims who had come forward once Victor was in custody, ensured he would never walk free again. The door opened behind her, and Isaiah stepped out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Abigail before leaning against the porch railing beside her. "Caleb's finally asleep," he said. "Wanted me to tell him the story again, how Clara Wilson shot the bad man and saved the day." Abigail smiled. "She's quite the hero in his eyes now." "In mine too," Isaiah admitted, "though I wish she'd let me know that was her plan. Nearly gave me a heart attack when I realized she'd followed you to the barn instead of staying with Caleb at the church." "Would you have agreed to it if she'd told you?" "Not a chance." He took a sip of his coffee. "But I'm grateful she did it anyway." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Marshal Williams sent word," Isaiah said finally. "The last of Fletcher's men have been rounded up. With both him and the mayor behind bars for conspiring with Victor, Dusk Creek might actually have a chance at becoming a decent place to live." "I'm glad," Abigail said softly. "Clara deserves to see that." Isaiah turned to look at her, his scarred face thoughtful in the fading light. "The stage to Denver leaves tomorrow morning." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. They had not discussed what would happen now that the immediate danger was past. With Victor in federal custody and Fletcher Harmon facing prison, there was no longer any reason for her to hide at the ranch. She was free to go wherever she chose. Are you asking if I'm planning to be on it? She asked carefully. Isaiah set his cup down on the railing. I'm asking if you want to be. Abigail met his gaze steadily. And if I said no, then I'd say this ranch could use a permanent teacher. He paused, then added more quietly. And Caleb isn't the only one who's gotten used to having you around. Before Abigail could respond, the front door creaked open. Caleb stood there in his nightshirt, Button the bear clutched to his chest. Abigail, he said, his voice growing stronger with each passing day. Are you leaving us? She knelt down to his level, her heart full. No, Caleb, I'm not leaving. The boy's face broke into a smile, the first real, unguarded smile she had seen from him. He threw his arms around her neck in a fierce hug, then looked up at his father with unmistakable triumph. Told you, he said, with the satisfaction of a child who has been proven right. Isaiah laughed, a full, rich sound that Abigail had never heard from him before. Yes, you did. He scooped his son up into his arms. Now back to bed, young man. Tomorrow's soon enough to celebrate. After Caleb was tucked in again, Isaiah returned to the porch, where Abigail still stood, looking out at the land that had somehow become home in such a short time. He's been so certain you'd stay, Isaiah said, coming to stand beside her. Wouldn't even entertain the possibility that you might want to go back east now that it's safe. Smart boy, Abigail replied. Takes after his father. Isaiah turned to face her fully. Abigail, I don't have much to offer. Just this ranch, a reputation most people fear, and a boy who needs mothering almost as much as I need. He stopped, then continued more carefully. As much as I need someone who sees past who I was to who I'm trying to be. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. Isaiah Morgan, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to consider it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. When you're ready. Abigail smiled. I'd say a woman who's been auctioned once might be hesitant to enter into another contract. For a moment, worry crossed Isaiah's face, but then he saw the teasing in her eyes. But this isn't a contract, she continued, reaching up to touch the scar on his cheek gently. This is a choice. My choice. She rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a kiss as gentle as it was certain. When she pulled back, Isaiah's eyes were bright with something that looked suspiciously like tears. I choose you, Abigail whispered. I choose Caleb. I choose this life we're building. Isaiah's arms came around her, drawing her close against the solid strength of him. Above them, stars multiplied across the vast New Mexico sky, witnesses to a promise that needed no auction block, no legal document, no price in gold or paper. Just two people who had found, against all odds, something worth more than freedom itself, a place to belong.